welcome everyone to this session. It is called Moodle RTO Integration, but I think I just got lazy typing it in, but I do apologise. But the fact is, the bulk of the integrations we do are with RTO, so even if I was to call it integrations, the topic predominantly would be about RTOs and dealing with them. But in saying that also, I'll talk about some other systems that we integrate with, which are very similar to RTO systems. So today we're going to be doing a story, a little bit of a history really, in regards to the evolution of integration plugins that Pukunui has done from early days. Pukunui is a company that offers services in 3 areas: in training and consulting, hosting and support, as well as custom developments and integrations. So we've had a fair go at it, and we're fairly knowledgeable in the area, and so, we'll get started. So the history is typically custom modules that we create for external systems, which include RTO systems, are typically very specific. Someone would come to us and say, we want to count these types of widgets, we want to do these types of things, and we would develop a specific solution for them. And again, the medium from which we did the integration varied as well, from web services to flat files to FTP locations to all sorts of things. But what we'd realized is that there was a consistent pattern arising from all these development that we had done, which was good for us to know. So we were able to look at reusing some code, more and more so to therefore make the solution cheaper and cheaper for our clients. But what we did see though is we were repeating the same thing. Typically, we looked at repeating the same thing over and over. So when we had a couple of RTO providers, one being PowerPro and the other one being RTO Manager in particular, approach us in regards to their requirements, we noticed that their specific requirements were very, very close. So you thought they were the same system. Not really, but they were very close. And so we started thinking about developing some common plugins and make those plugins somewhat more generic that we could just use without having to then implement different versions of that. Because previously, when a client came to us and said, we use RTO Manager, what we found is that they were using RTO Manager this way, and then we had another client come to us still using RTO Manager, but they're using it that way. And so because of that, what we ended up doing is doing 2 separate solutions, because they were requesting for different bits of information. Some wanted grades to go back, some just wanted completion information to go back. Some wanted grouping information to go back, some wanted payment information to go back. So what we were noticing is we were just happy to do custom solutions, obviously. But so we had to look at looking at doing a common plugin that would address the common use or the general usage of say RTO Manager and Moodle, the integration between that, or even PowerPro and Moodle. Now, that's not to say that the client still couldn't come back to us and say, look, we want to count shoe size or hair color or whatever. They want something bespoke. We could do that as well, but we wanted to work on something that was common. And so the first common plugin we ended up working with was something called Remote Files plugin. And what that plugin allowed us to do was to move folders, move CSV files from an external FTP location into Moodle, and then move it from the Moodle to an external location. Now that may sound simple, but it's not necessarily the case, because there's all these hoops and loops that one has to jump through. Now, FTP file, CSV files is one format that the data can take. There's things like web services, there's Excel spreadsheets we can do, but we decided to go with CSV because we wanted to go to the lowest common denominator that could be used by other systems. And while web services are quite nifty and Excel spreadsheets are quite fancy and XML quite, we saw that a CSV file was like the lowest base common denominator that other systems could import and export as well. So it was the decision for going that way. So we developed this thing called Remote Files plugin, Remote Files it's called, and it allowed for files to be transferred from an external system like RTO Manager or PowerPro into Moodle, vice versa. When we had some data in Moodle, we would transfer it back. And so I've got a bit of a mud map as to how that kind of worked. One of the security issues in Moodle is that an external system, such as RTO system here, cannot write directly into a folder in Moodle because of security. So because of that, what we found is we needed an FTP location in the middle. That FTP location can reside anywhere. Some people were using box.com, or we haven't used the Google one yet, but the other one, Dropbox. So basically, it's a location where a file could reside. It could be a FTP location on a server on the RTO side, or it could be an FTP location on the Moodle side, just as long as it's not inside Moodle application itself. Because of security reasons, you wouldn't be able to get there. Or if you did get there, you've just opened a very big hole to your Moodle site. So the solution that we had to come up with had to incorporate this kind of flow. So we said, RTO Manager, we require you to place users and user information and enrollment information into a folder. And again, we said that folder could reside anywhere as long as we had an IP address, a username, and a password, so we could access it via FTP. That's all we needed to do. And so once we established that that folder could be accessed by them and could be accessed by us programmatically, then that was the folder to be used. So the remote files, what the remote files would do is it would read this folder. If there are any files in there that match a particular pattern, for example, .csv or was the pattern that we'd suggested, what it would do, it would pick that file up. It would then make a copy of the file inside the Moodle data folder. There's a subfolder inside there, or like user uploads or something. It would make a copy of that. Then it would also move that file from the source folder into a transferred folder. Typically, the transferred folder would be a subdirectory of the source file. The reason for that was because we also wanted a way of easily tracking what happened to a file. You know, if all of a sudden records weren't being transferred across, we could quite easily go into FileZilla or something like that and have a look at this folder here. Now, if we looked in that folder and we found that it contained a number of CSV files, then we knew that the process of transfer, the remote files plugin, was not working because obviously the files are still sitting there. If we found that that folder was empty, we would then look into the subfolder. Now, we would expect all the CSV files to be in the transferred folder because that's how we can check. So if we found that that folder was empty as well, then what we would say is we don't believe that the RTO system is sending files across, because should it have been processed correctly, that file should have resided, a copy should have resided in Moodle and a copy should have resided in the transferred folder. So that's probably why we came up with that solution, and it works quite well, and it's very easy to check. You're not going through lines of code and trying to figure out what happens. You can very quickly just do a FileZilla look up on the folder and just check what's going on in there, and that was the reason we went down that way. So that was the remote files plugin, and that's in a very simple form. That's how it was meant to work, to integrate passing data from say an RTO system to Moodle. Conversely, passing data back typically would be completion information or grade information. We would use the same process, except this time we would have some sort of process out in Moodle that would either run every minute, every hour, or every day, that would say, go and get me everyone who's completed something, or go and get me everyone who's got a grade, whatever the criteria is. We would then create a CSV file, and we would place it in this completion data folder. The remote files, again, which can run like once every minute, would poll this file, and if it found the file with the same pattern, .csv, it would do exactly the same thing, make a copy of that into the FTP location, and it would then move that file into the transferred folder. So same process going out as was going in. And again, if something went wrong, it was very quick for us to be able to check these 3 folders and work out what was going on. And then obviously the RTO system was responsible for logging into the FTP location and extracting the files that we had set there. So whether we're loading files every 5 minutes or once an hour or once a day, they would have their own scheduled tasks that would run in whatever frequency they wanted to check that file, and the files would transfer across. I suppose I should say, if there's any questions about that remote file transfer, anything that sparks up any interest or confusion, or if something's not too clear, please by all means let me know. I'm happy to answer questions as we go along, because as I say, it's more of this presentation is more a story of how we got where we are with some of our integrations. Trish, can it be one way? Yes, of course. And I forgot to mention, with remote files, I think I mentioned in the next slide actually. Yes, it can be one way, and I'll come to that in a sec. Because whenever we create a remote files plugin record, we have the following settings. We say whether it's going to be, are we putting or pushing information into the folder, or are we getting information from that folder? And then obviously we need to talk about what type of protocol we're going to use. Then the credentials for that FTP location, login, passwords, etc. Then we talked about the source and the transferred folders, because we need to know and also the destination. They're the 3 folders that we need to record, and as well as what operation are we doing, because in some cases, most operations we move, but we could have left the file there, or we could have just deleted the file as well. So there's, and again, the last thing is frequency. How frequently are we running this? Once a minute, once an hour, once a day? So when we build up one of these remote file records, that would be transferring of information from one location to another. Now, as I say on this site, we can create multiple connections. So we might have one connection that's getting new user information from one FTP location, but then we might have another one pushing grade information into another folder somewhere else, even on another server, and again pushing course completion information onto another one. So so you can have multiple records, and we had multiple imports and export records for each site, because typically we'd have one import and we'd have 2 exports. One exports would be the exporting for grade information, the other exporting for course completion information. And again, as I said, it could be further customized, because it really depends on what trigger the client wants to pass data from Moodle to the RTO system, because the trigger could be a number of things could be triggering. But this remote files it's more to do with transferring just the CSV file, not how the CSV file got created in the first place. It just says there's a CSV file, we need to pass that over to the RTO. So that's what it was dealing with. Hopefully that answered your question there, Trish. We did similar thing, but had problems with different server config. Yes. Well, I'm hoping that maybe Shane may join us and tell us a lot of the war stories he had with regards to even just getting FTP, because we tried different things, and yes, it's fun and games. So, and again, if you're only interested in exporting, then you'd just be creating, if I go back, you'd just be creating push or put records. You're not going to be pulling any of them, so you can be exporting them to that folder. And then your external system can then read that. And as I said, the reason I took the RTO out is because we had SharePoint integrating this into their system. We had SAP integrating this particular solution in there. So we've had so while it originated from a requirement from RTO, we've had other systems also utilizing this, because basically it's just transferring of information. But quite simple, low tech. That's not to mention we've done high tech stuff, but that's the low tech version. Now, the next part, the next solution, now that we had data transferring back and forth, we thought that's great, but how do we now process that information? And what we found is previously we used to do custom solutions that would, we'd say, you provide us with exactly what it is that you want, and so we'll build a custom solution that will import exactly what you've asked us for. And so we went down that line for a while. But what we noticed again is that all the work and effort we were doing, we saw that this already pre-existed in the Moodle user upload module. So I don't know if anyone's used the Moodle user upload modules, where you create a CSV file. I think, unfortunately, the sample down here is really tiny to read, but just create a sample. This module is extremely feature-rich. If you've ever seen it, it allows you to put new users, update existing users, put users into courses, enroll users into courses, put users into groups, delete users, set their passwords, put users into cohorts, create new groups. It's like, it does everything. Well, it does a lot. And so what we thought is we should really leverage that particular functionality when it came to processing this CSV file, because it's one thing for RTO Manager to say, here's the CSV file with all the data, but then what we would have to do is read that CSV file and say, okay, now I've got to do an update statement to this table, and I'm going to do an update statement to that, and we would process it manually. But if we were to receive this CSV file in the format that prescribes to the Moodle user upload module, then we could just feed it directly to that module, and that's what we did do. And the beauty of that is that leverages the full range of features that the Moodle user upload module has. Not to mention, it's also future-proof, because one way we proved that was to do with the cohorts. They brought in cohorts, and all of a sudden cohort was an extra column that you could put into your user upload, and people were adding that to their RTO Manager output, and it got sucked into Moodle quite happily. We didn't have to change a line of code. So that's another reason we thought that would be a bit more future-proofing. So any additional features that Moodle would now add to their upload module would be incorporated in our plugin, which is great. So at no cost and no effort, which is even better. So, okay, reading Lifesaver. And tells you if you have errors and duplicates. Yes. So what we had to do, it's true, it does tells you a whole swag of reports. The reports are fantastic at that as well. And as I say, you're not having to, we as developers didn't have to rebuild all these rules again. We just decided to use that. So I'll go to the next slide, probably just to explain how excuse me. So effectively, from the previous slide, as I said, that a CSV file ended up in the Moodle data folder somewhere, which was now on the inside of Moodle. Even though that's the Moodle server, this file is now inside the Moodle, which means Moodle can now read it. And excuse me. So with that, we created this automated user upload. And what this automated user upload would do, effectively, would execute the functionality that you found in the upload module. So which was effective, typically it's create users, enroll users, and also update users and groups and everything else. But I've just made the thing simple. The two most common functionality that they use that. Now, as you're aware, if you use the process manually, there's a report that comes out on the screen. So what we did is we captured that output, and we put that output into a report, and we then emailed the administrator. So if this process runs every hour, or maybe it runs at 10 o'clock every night, the administrator, all he has to do is rock up early in the morning and open up his email. It'll tell him what was processed, what was not processed. If they're setting something up in RTO Manager, and say they got the course name incorrect in RTO Manager, and it tried to feed in there, this process would say, course does not exist, and they'd obviously check their records and they'll say, okay, there's a mismatch here, and they can rerun that again. So effectively, it was just a pushing. So this automation was create the user and select the course that you want within your RTO system, and get that RTO system to present that information in a CSV file that matches the format of the Moodle user upload, and it would just get processed across. So that was quite good. On top of that, we still use that feature of having a processed folder. So once we processed that file, we removed it from the Moodle data directory and we placed it in here. Again, allowing us to audit. So for example, if you knew 100 users should have been processed and you didn't get your email, then you have to say to yourself, well, was it first sent? You'd look in this folder, and if it was in here, then you'd say, well, it must have been processed to get into this folder, therefore maybe something wrong with my emails, or something, or maybe there's an error in the data. But if you can't find it in here, and if you found it in here, then you'd say, well, maybe the standard job that runs at every hour or at 10 o'clock at night, maybe that's not running because the file hasn't been moved. The file is still remained in the original. But if the file did not exist in either folders, then you'd go back up the line and go and talk to RTO Manager and see what's going on that way. So that's the automated user upload, and as I say, it's a bit of a lifesaver because now people can just run these things automatically and expect a nice email in the morning or whenever they decide to run the process. Okay, moving on. Automated, so it contains, when we created the plugin, basically it contains the same settings as the user upload module, such as things like the upload type, what do we do for existing users, what do we do for new users, do we reset passwords, all the settings that you would normally get would be included in this automated user upload, because what we would do is these would transfer as parameters into the module when the module runs, and so we had whatever settings you had would now get transferred into that as well. In addition to that, we were able to schedule this upload plugin when it was to run, and again we had to put the source location, the process location, and who would receive the email. That could be one or many emails that that could be sent out in regards to what happened overnight or what happened on the bash run. Just reading the messages. Lovely. Yes, yeah, that's, and it's funny because when I talked to some of the IT guys on the other side from not RTO Manager but other people that we've integrated with, they've always asked for these complicated solutions, and I'm thinking, how the heck are we going to debug this if something goes wrong, you know? And there's going to be so much more overhead. So sometimes simple is best. So to set up this plugin, basically, you just go and copy whatever settings you would have had on your user upload and just put that in there plus your file locations. You'd have to go into Moodle and create a couple of new folders. For example, we'd have one under the Moodle data directory. We would create a folder called user upload, and that would be the source folder that we would read from. And then underneath user upload, we'd have a / processed. So we would move it out of that folder into the processed folder. Any questions? All good? Good. Okay. Okay. So then we came to talking about exports, and in dealing with lots of integrations, we found that the exports typically came down to two sets of data. One was grade information, so whenever someone got a grade, which meant typically the RTO system was tracking individual activities within a unit or a course, and not just the unit itself. So they needed, so if you had an if you had a unit that had 4 assignments, some people were using RTO Manager or PowerPro in a way that required the individual grades to be pumped back into PowerPro, so we were able to create a grade export. Now, typically this runs again, can run in whatever schedule you want, but typically it runs overnight. You can run it once an hour if you like. We have some sites that run it hourly, but typically it runs overnight, and it's a very easy check for us because we just go to the grade book and we just say, go and get us any record that has been updated over the last 24 hours. Typically, we would actually do it over the last 48 hours, and the RTO Manager side would handle for that redundancy, that the extra 24 hours, because just in case something drops off the planner or something. So, but the notion was very simple for us. So we had this grade completion routine, was reading the grade book and was creating this file and placing it in the inside of Moodle, another folder called grade export. Now we then used the remote files process to then send that out to the FTP location, which we can come back to and look again. But typically, the information that was being sent out was typically grade or completion. Completion information was where you put completion tracking on, and it's a really good solution, completion tracking, because it allows you to define what the completion dates are, or what the completion criteria is. You have to get 100% in a quiz, or you have to have read everything, or you have to fill out a feedback, or whatever the case may be. The downside of the completion export was that if someone had not set the course completion criteria up correctly and had to reset it, for those that have had this horrible experience, what happens is that all the end dates disappear. Poof, gone. And then depending on the new condition that you set to flag what is completion, basically the conditions fall into two categories. There's automatic conditions and there's manual conditions. What I mean by that, automatic conditions are conditions where the system can check automatically, did I get 100% in the quiz? So the system can check that, and if it says, and when you run something, it'll say, yes, you did, and you've completed the course. Manual completion is where you set the completion criteria on an activity, like the user must tick this label as completed. And if the user ticks that label as completed, now what happened is the user ticked this label as completed 3 weeks ago, the system got set, and the user was set as completed. You've stuffed up your completion, and so you've reset it. Now the user is not going to go back and re-tick this thing completed, so therefore you've lost that trigger. So some of the downsides to the completion tracking that we found, because if people reset it, then even if it was automatically rechecked, they would now have a new completion date saying that they've completed it today, even though they would have completed it 3 weeks ago, whatever the case may be. And that information would then get sent back to RTO Manager. Maybe this is outside the scope of this exercise, but it was just the joys that we experienced. We also had some clients that wanted further enhancements to this extract, in that they wanted to set a permission to say, we want to manually run this. And when we dug around a bit deeper, we found out that they were going in there and they were reviewing the grades and saying, well, no, this person's grade is far too low. We should really give them an extra 5 points. And so they would go in there and fudge the books to make sure that they get their funding or something. I don't know what it was. So instead of being automatic here, they would run this ad hoc. Same process would happen. It would just go through. So rather than saying, go and get me all the records over the last 24 hours, it would just go and get all the records for the courses. So there's a couple of features there. Moving along. No questions? Course end dates and assignment end dates. Yep. In relation to course end dates, you get them from the course completion module. The assignment end dates, again, if the assignment is completed, assignment's a funny one because you've got dates for date that was submitted, date it was graded, date it was resubmitted, so dates everywhere for that one. But if you set an activity completion, and there's also activity completion on an assignment as well, there's dates there, so it really depends where you want it. I'm trying to remember, for us, I think we leverage the grade book as being the source of truth for end dates. So while an assignment could be submitted on the 1st and then could get graded on the second and then get feedback on the third, then resubmitted again and regraded. We would just take the grade from the gradebook. Which tables are you collecting assignment completion date from? As I said, the gradebook. The gradebook was the generic one. We just said we're going to take it from the grade. Again, we could have customized it. If you said, look, we really want it on the submission date, we'd just do a customization there. Now, with the grade export, obviously, in the settings page, we were recording the destination folder, the file naming conventions, because what we had in that regard was, depending on the receiving system, whether it's RTO Manager, Power Pro, or whatever, SAP, they'd need their files coming in a particular way, and so you'd have an opportunity to set that in the settings page of the plugin. And again, we had that run manually flag. Run manually, yeah, it makes sense. So they can run that process manually. Okay. Exporting, this is, excuse me. The other integration that's arisen was people were trying to get a workflow balance in regards to, now we've got two systems. We've got RTO, so if I went back to my first slide, this one here. Now we've got two systems. Now, what's the user's experience? What's the student's experience? Do they go into Moodle or do they go into RTO Manager? Do they pay in Moodle? Do they pay in RTO Manager or Power Pro? How can that work? And as I said, every time a client approached us, we found out that they were using both Moodle and RTO Manager slightly differently. Nothing wrong with that. Of course you can, because their requirements were different from other organizations. So, but what we found is that in some instances, the origination of the user information and the enrollment information was coming from RTO Manager. So typically we built the first types of solution to always expect that information to be derived from somewhere external and be pumped into Moodle. What we're finding now is that there's becoming a requirement, for whatever reason, that Moodle become what they call the source of truth. So Moodle now becomes the source of truth in relation to all the information. So that way, as far as the user's experience is concerned, the user goes into Moodle, the user registers in Moodle, becomes a user record, the user then enrolls in Moodle. It may involve a PayPal transaction where they're parted with money. And then again, we have this new export new user enrollments plugin that runs, again, whatever frequency you want. And at the end of the day, it sends a notification to the administrator saying, because remember, these people could be doing this overnight or because you're doing self-registration and self-enrollment. So the administrator will get a notification in regards to these two transactions, and we would also look at populating a CSV file that says, here's a bunch of new users that would go off to the RTO provider, and here's a bunch of new enrollments that would go off to. So this is in the creation of the user account. As I said, typically that has been created in the RTO system being passed in here. So what we're finding is Moodle is now creating the users, passing that across, creating the enrollment, passing that across, recording the grades, passing that across. So it's one-way traffic, and Moodle is becoming the source of truth. So, and which works really well because it's important. Moodle does LMS really well, which is delivering content, recording the activities, etc. And so all the other stuff in regards to management, student management or RTO management and eventness reporting and whatnot, that's all done really well by the RTO systems. So it's good for Moodle just to feed that across and Moodle just continue to do what it does well. So this is another form of integration between Moodle and RTO systems, or any systems for that matter. So coming to a bit of a close here, again, that would be recording things such as the destination folder, the emails, etc. And as I said, Moodle now becomes the source of truth. I'll just read the question. Any question? No, okay. No, same questions. All right. I think I've tried to cover, I didn't want to go, as you noticed, there's no technical mumbo jumbo in here. I've tried to keep it as simple as possible. Hopefully it was simple, hopefully it was followable. Should you require any further information, I'm more than happy to have a chat, more than happy to talk about what we've done, the experiences that we've had, and if we can help you out in any way, I'd be happy to. I'll now open it up. If you have any questions, please let me know. Or if Shane wanted to tell us some of his war stories, he's more welcome to as well.
Hey, Tom. Got an echo here. I'll quickly jump in. I did have a couple of points to make and probably to answer some of those questions. So this is from the more nerdy point of view. So I just remember that. So yeah, so this is more from the developing point of view and answering some of these questions. I had a couple of points to make so when developing these plugins, so I was heavily involved in those first two plugins and getting the information into the systems. There's always things to watch. So the first one is there's always client system restrictions, and quite often you think there is actually, ideally there is a better way to do it, but you're restricted by the system that you're connecting to. And so quite often as a developer and writing these plugins, you're just restricted by that, and you try to do it in the most generic way possible that's going to work across multiple systems. But obviously there's system restrictions on what you're connecting to. Which then leads on to the next point is with the war stories, there's problems with this. So you write these plugins and you always have this issue of changes happening. So API changes in terms of code, or changes in the way data is output from one system or input into another, what it expects. Moodle's reasonably easy as there's lead in time in terms of development. So you know when functions are outdated and that. It becomes a bigger problem when external systems change. And so this is one of the problems of having plugins that connect to external systems. You need to, it's changes in that external system that always cause problems. And sometimes if you've written your code well, it can handle that. It's hardened somewhat, but sometimes there's no avoiding it. You need to update your plugins. So that's always a risk for whatever you're doing, not even for this, for whatever plugins you have where it's integrating to another system. It's when the other system changes. And so a great example of something we've probably dealt with over the past few years is Turnitin, where they've been changing their APIs. And so the plugins have gone through so many different versions to keep up with their changes. So they had a period of a couple of years where it was very hard to keep up with all the changes they were doing. Which is why standards are very important too. So if you can adhere to kind of web standards as much as possible, it always helps. Mitigating that somewhat, yes, just writing your code in clear, extensible code structures. So basically, sometimes problems aren't identified until after you've written it. You know, you hope you've addressed every problem. But you know, sometimes it's just something you haven't thought of, or more often is the case is we write plugins for clients and they go, oh, it would be nice if it also did something, you know, X, Y, Z. And so you try to extend it out. My last point here, and this came back to the reporting thing from earlier, it's always good to provide as much info about what is happening to the end user. There's nothing worse than clicking a button and seeing nothing on screen, and then a message came out saying there was an issue, and that's it. So quite often the reporting of that, so it was quite a lot with the automatic user uploads, because usually if you do it manually, you get a lot of information coming back. So that's a case where you need to capture the problem out, you know, any problems or any reporting, and try to send that back in some way. Just to answer a couple of those questions, so Dot asked earlier about server configurations. Yeah, that was an issue with the remote files transfer. To get around it, that was one of the reasons for using FTP. It's a standard protocol, and ideally every system should treat commands the same way. However, they don't. Microsoft kindly do things slightly differently. So there were some problems with that. There's also permission problems when dealing with this as well. The user you have that can get a file from external system may not have the permissions to move a file or to delete it. So while the plugin at the middle end, you say, I want to move the file, the problem might be the user that's accessing that system. The username password you have doesn't have those permissions. So in writing that plugin, we actually added a few protocols to try and see, which one would work. We understand some clients will open up some ports and firewalls and IT restrictions and so on to different protocols, and some won't. And so it's again trying to make the plugin work for as generally as you can. So yeah, that's the slide there, Dom. Even FTP has different modes as well. So it was just trying to work with all of that. And the question, I was just Matthew's question there about the table you're collecting the assignment completion data from. I didn't write the plugin, but ideally you'd be using the Moodle APIs because things change. There's always data structures that change in databases. But if you use the APIs that come with Moodle, this is probably very nerdy for those who aren't developers. But if you use the APIs, it's a much better way because obviously they change as the data structures change. So that's always the better way to do things rather than directly polling the database. So that's it from me. It's just a couple of points I'd written down. Yeah, and so just Trish's thing about Dom saying the design's love. Yeah. You do want a simple design, and in this case, I think that whole integration was broken down to several plugins, which was nice. Each plugin did its job, and that way you could use that plugin for other integrations as well. It wasn't just tied into this one plugin doing everything. You could actually break it down to simple tasks, so that made it very easy. I will leave it there. Hand it back to you, Dom.
All right. That's great. Yeah, happy to take any more questions if people have it. I hope that that information helps you in your endeavours to integrate with things. And yes, I do apologise for the heading, missing out RTO, but hopefully that was explained clearly. No more questions?
Hi, this is Vinny.
Oh, yes, Vinny.
Hi, I just thought I'd jump in and put my other hat on and say thanks very much on behalf of the iMoot team for your presentation today, Dom.
Pleasure.
And for those of you, I don't know if everybody knows who the Pukunui team is, but there's you'll see us around the iMoot. There's myself. I'm based over in Malaysia. Shane and his team over in Hong Kong with Wendy. We've got Jim, Dom, Pam, and some other staff, Priya, some other staff in the Perth office, and Scott and his team in Sydney. So that's basically the Pukunui team, and obviously we put on the iMoot as well with some extra helpers. So if you want to connect with any of us, just grab us around the rest of the iMoot. So thanks once again, Dom, for presenting today.
No worries.